It was a quiet evening in the city, the kind of night when most people stayed inside, either resting after a long day or preparing for the week ahead. The streets were mostly empty, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. A few people walked hurriedly to catch the last buses or meet friends for late-night coffee, but otherwise the city seemed to hold its breath. Among the quiet streets, a group of police officers drove slowly, their patrol car moving like a dark shadow through the empty roads. They were talking and joking among themselves, their laughter echoing faintly against the walls of buildings. They had been on duty for several hours, but fatigue did not seem to slow their energy. Instead, it made them reckless. They saw him as soon as he stepped onto the corner, a man walking with purpose, his shoulders squared, moving steadily despite the empty streets around him. He carried himself with confidence, as if the city itself recognized his presence. The officers slowed their car, their eyes following him. They started whispering, making remarks that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but in their own circle, it fueled a strange sense of amusement. The man did not notice them. He was focused on his path, lost in his own thoughts, the rhythm of his steps steady and unwavering. One of the officers nudged another, a smirk on his face, and with a nod, they decided to act. It was meant to be a joke, they said to each other, a little prank to break the monotony of a long shift. They jumped out of the car, shouting at the man to stop. He turned, his eyes calm but sharp, recognizing the urgency in their voices but not showing fear. The officers grabbed him without hesitation. There was laughter, some nervous, some bold, and before the man could ask a single question, they had him pinned against a lamppost. They wrapped a rope around him, tying him in a way that was meant to restrict movement but also show their supposed dominance. They stepped back, laughing and joking, proud of what they believed was clever mischief. The man remained calm, his expression serene. He did not struggle, did not shout, did not panic. Instead, he studied them, observing their behavior, their gestures, the way they moved around him. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet understanding that this moment was not what it seemed for those who thought they were in control. Passers-by slowed down, some whispering to each other, others taking out their phones to record. There was a mixture of shock and disbelief, and the officers barely noticed, caught up in their own amusement. A woman walking her dog stopped a few feet away, her hands covering her mouth. She tried to speak, to question what was happening, but her voice was drowned by the officers' laughter. A man with a grocery bag shook his head, muttering under his breath, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. The city, usually bustling and chaotic, had become an audience to this strange and unsettling moment. The man tied to the pole remained silent, his calmness a stark contrast to the tension and arrogance surrounding him. The officers continued to joke, making comments that were casual yet cutting, comments that reflected a bias they did not even try to hide. They were laughing at a man whose only fault in their eyes was walking alone at night. They had created a spectacle, and in their minds it was harmless fun. They did not notice the way people were watching, the way whispers and phone recordings started to circulate. Their laughter was loud, but the reality of the situation was beginning to pierce through the noise. The man finally spoke, his voice even and steady, but calm enough to stop the officers mid-laugh.
"Do you know who I am?"
he asked, his tone more of a statement than a question. The officers looked at each other, confused. One of them laughed nervously, thinking it was part of the act, some kind of bravado to scare them. "Relax, man. We're just having some fun," one of the officers said, trying to regain control of the situation. But the calmness in the man's eyes was different from fear. It was the kind of calm that comes from knowing something the others do not. People who had been watching started to step closer, their curiosity growing. A few more recordings were taken, and the murmurs spread faster. The man's voice carried across the street, measured and calm, but powerful enough to silence the officers for a moment. The officers, still holding the rope, finally started to realize that this was not just an ordinary person. There was a pause, a brief moment of uncertainty where their laughter faltered. They looked at each other, a question forming in their eyes. None of them had ever experienced this before. None of them expected to be in a position where their actions, meant as entertainment, were completely out of place. The street seemed to hold its breath along with him. The man's composure highlighted the absurdity of what they had done. He was not angry, not even annoyed. He simply looked at them with a patience that made them uncomfortable. It was a look that demanded reflection, that asked them to consider their actions without a word of scolding. Time seemed to stretch. The officers' joking stopped, replaced with nervous glances and forced smiles. Some shifted their weight, unsure where to place their hands, realizing that they had crossed a line. The man's calm presence was disarming, and it began to sink in that this was not a situation they could control with laughter or force. The passerby, now gathered in small groups, whispered among themselves, sharing what they knew. Some called friends, some shared videos, and soon the scene became more than a street corner event. It was a moment that captured the city's attention, a moment where arrogance met patience, where prejudice was confronted not with anger, but with dignity. The man's quiet strength reminded the officers, and everyone watching, that true power does not always roar. It often stands silently, observing, waiting, letting others reveal their true selves. The officers, who had tied him for fun, were now caught in a moment of introspection they could not easily escape. He continued to speak softly, but every word carried weight. He asked simple questions, ones that made the officers stumble in their answers, revealing their ignorance and assumptions. His calmness contrasted with their jittery attempts to justify their actions. The community watched, sensing that something bigger than a prank was unfolding. The man was demonstrating something they could not ignore: dignity, authority, and the quiet assertion of respect. By the time backup units arrived, not to intervene but simply to witness, the officers were subdued. They had begun to understand, however slowly, the gravity of what they had done. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the occasional whisper from the crowd. People who had been recording began sharing their footage online, and the first hints of a story began to emerge, a story that would ripple through the city and beyond. The man remained calm throughout, tied to the pole yet unshaken, a silent teacher in the middle of a lesson the officers had yet to learn. The night air was still, but the impact of this moment was growing, spreading quietly like a ripple in water. It was the kind of moment that would be remembered, not for the officers' intended joke, but for the way it revealed truth, patience, and an unexpected form of power. As the crowd dispersed, whispers of astonishment and curiosity lingered in the air. The officers were left to untie him, their hands shaky, their minds racing with questions they had never expected to ask. And the man, calm and collected, stepped away from the pole, his dignity intact, leaving behind a lesson far greater than any punishment or reprimand could deliver. The city had witnessed something remarkable that night, a story that would be told and retold, not just for the incident itself, but for the way it revealed character, the way it exposed prejudice, and the way a single person tied to a pole could turn fear and mockery into reflection and respect. The officers finally began to untie him, their hands shaking slightly as they realized the absurdity of what had just happened. Their faces were pale, and the laughter that had filled the night air was replaced by uneasy silence. The man remained calm, his demeanor steady, his posture upright, as though nothing had disturbed him at all. He did not scold them, he did not raise his voice. Instead, he waited for them to recognize the truth on their own, letting his quiet authority speak louder than any words could. One officer, the youngest among them, glanced around nervously, his mind racing. He had never imagined a situation like this. The others looked at him, and then back at the man, as if seeking an explanation or some reassurance that this was just a mistake that could be brushed off. But deep down they all sensed that this was no ordinary encounter. There was something about the way he carried himself, the calm in his eyes, that demanded respect. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, measured, yet firm. "I am the new chief of this department," he said. The words were simple, but their weight hit like a thunderclap. The officers froze, staring at him in disbelief. Some stumbled backward, nearly tripping over their own feet. Others exchanged uneasy glances, mouths opening and closing without words. They had humiliated a man without knowing he was in a position of authority over them. The realization hit hard. The crowd that had gathered began murmuring, their whispers spreading like wildfire. People who had been watching, some recording the incident, began piecing together the truth. Phones came out, cameras aimed, and the scene shifted from a strange prank to an extraordinary moment of revelation. The man's calm and composed expression contrasted sharply with the panic and shame now visible on the officers' faces. One officer, trying to regain some sense of control, stammered, We didn't know. We thought. His words trailed off, leaving nothing but embarrassment and the raw truth of their actions. Another muttered a half-hearted apology, but the tone lacked sincerity. They had not expected to be caught in such a position, and their usual bravado had evaporated. The man nodded slightly, acknowledging their reactions without anger. He could have yelled, could have humiliated them in return, but he chose restraint. He understood the impact of patience and calmness in moments like this. He spoke again, more firmly this time, yet still without aggression. Your actions tonight were reckless. They were disrespectful and fueled by assumptions that have no place in this department. The officer shrank under his words, realizing the gravity of their behavior. The crowd remained silent, watching every movement, sensing the shift in power. People whispered to one another, discussing what they had just witnessed. The story was beginning to spread beyond the streets. A simple act of prejudice had now become a public lesson in humility and respect. The man, standing tall, embodied authority without the need for shouting or force. The officers, still recovering from the shock, tried to speak again, but the man's gaze stopped them. He waited patiently, allowing them to understand that their actions had consequences. He did not need to threaten them. His presence alone was enough to command attention and reflection. Slowly, one officer spoke, his voice low. We were wrong. We didn't think. His words hung in the air, incomplete, as if the weight of truth had made it impossible to finish the sentence. The man nodded again, signaling that acknowledgement was the first step. He did not demand more than that. He knew that change started with recognition and reflection. The crowd sensed the lesson unfolding before them. What began as a disturbing incident was now turning into a moment of revelation, showing the importance of respect and the dangers of prejudice. He continued, speaking directly to the officers, but loud enough for the crowd to hear. Leadership is not about fear or control. It is about respect, integrity, and the ability to make the right decisions even when no one is watching. Tonight, you failed to do that. His words were firm, but they carried no malice. They were designed to teach, to correct, and to guide. The officers listened, ashamed but unable to interrupt. They had been confronted not by anger, but by authority and wisdom, the community. Watching began to nod, some whispering agreements to one another. The man's words were not just for the officers. They were for everyone who had seen the event. The message was clear. Prejudice has consequences, and true leadership is revealed in the way one handles it. The young officer who had first hesitated now spoke up again, voice trembling. We didn't know, we never expected. His words were sincere this time, filled with regret and recognition of wrongdoing. The man acknowledged him, giving a small, encouraging nod, showing that while mistakes are serious, they can also be opportunities for growth. A few officers tried to laugh nervously, attempting to lighten the tension, but their gestures fell flat. The weight of the situation was too real. They realized that no joke could undo what had happened, and no humor could erase the lesson they had just received. The man's calm demeanor and clear words had a powerful effect, transforming embarrassment into a moment of reflection. As the crowd began to disperse, people continued whispering to one another, their conversations full of astonishment and admiration. Some shared what they had recorded on social media, spreading the story further. The incident, which started as a small act of prejudice, was becoming a story of authority, patience, and the exposure of biases that often go unchallenged. The man finally stepped away from the pole, untying himself completely and adjusting his clothes. He did not rush. He did not show anger. Every movement was deliberate, projecting confidence and composure. The officers watched, unsure of how to react, caught between relief and shame. Their earlier laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding of the power dynamics that had shifted in an instant. He addressed the officers one last time before leaving the street, his voice steady. Remember tonight. Remember what it means to act responsibly and respectfully. Leadership is about more than uniform and authority. It is about character, and tonight you have been reminded of that. With that, he walked away, leaving a mix of shock, admiration, and introspection in his wake. The officers remained for a few moments, silent, each lost in thought. They had faced an unexpected test, one that exposed their own biases and the consequences of reckless behavior. The experience was humbling, and although it had been uncomfortable, it planted a seed for change. They realized that leadership is earned not through intimidation or jokes, but through integrity and accountability. Meanwhile, the community began talking more openly about the incident, sharing their perspectives and discussing the importance of addressing prejudice. Local leaders and activists saw the opportunity to turn this moment into a conversation about reform and trust building. The story spread quickly, serving as a lesson not just for the officers involved, but for everyone who witnessed it, directly or indirectly. The man's calm response and measured words had turned what could have been a humiliating or dangerous situation into a powerful teaching moment. The city slowly began to absorb the implications of the night, understanding that one person's dignity could have a far-reaching impact. In the days that followed, the story circulated widely. News outlets picked it up, social media amplified the narrative, and people from all walks of life discussed it. The incident became more than a simple prank gone wrong. It became a symbol of accountability, patience, and the quiet power of integrity. The officers involved were forced to confront themselves and their actions. They faced internal discussions, evaluations, and reflections. Some were defensive at first, but the overwhelming response from the man, the community, and the city made it impossible to dismiss. The lessons of that night would stay with them, shaping their behavior and perspective for years to come. And the man, the new chief, continued his work with calm authority, his leadership style now visible to the entire department. He had shown that true power does not always roar, that patience and composure can teach more effectively than anger or punishment. The incident remained a turning point, a story retold as a reminder that prejudice can be confronted not with aggression, but with dignity, and that leadership is defined by character, not position. The next morning, the police department was buzzing with tension. Word of the previous night's incident had spread quickly, and the hallways were filled with whispers and uneasy glances. Officers who had witnessed the event, or heard about it secondhand, walked with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Everyone knew that the prank had backfired spectacularly, and the one they had humiliated was none other than the newly appointed chief. The department felt different now, charged with a quiet intensity that had not existed before. The officers, who had tied him to the pole, arrived early, unsure how to face the man they had treated so recklessly. Guilt weighed heavily on them. Some tried to joke to ease the tension, but even the bravest of them found their humor falling flat. The reality of their actions was undeniable, and the memory of the chief's calm, authoritative gaze haunted them. They realized that their casual arrogance had been met with a powerful display of dignity they could neither match nor dismiss. The chief arrived at the precinct, unassuming yet commanding attention simply by being there. His calm demeanor and measured steps set the tone immediately. He did not rush, he did not scold, but every officer knew that the events of the previous night would be addressed. He called a meeting, asking everyone to gather in the conference room. The murmurs quieted as officers realized this was not just another briefing. This was a moment to confront the consequences of their behavior. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. The officers who had committed the prank stood at the back, shifting nervously, while others watched with curiosity. The chief began speaking, his voice firm but calm, filling the room without the need for shouting. Last night, actions were taken that were reckless and disrespectful. The people we are meant to serve deserve better, and the conduct displayed does not reflect the values of this department. He paused, letting the words sink in. Eyes lowered, heads nodded slightly, and even those who had tried to defend the prank could not escape the weight of his statement. He continued, explaining the importance of professionalism, respect, and accountability. He emphasized that leadership was not about power over others, but about serving the community and maintaining trust. The officers listened, some nodding in agreement, others still wrestling with shame. One of the officers who had tied him to the pole finally spoke up, voice trembling. "Chief, we didn't realize. We just thought it was a joke." His words were sincere, revealing a mix of guilt and confusion. The chief looked at him calmly. "A joke at someone else's expense is never harmless. It reflects a lack of judgment and understanding. We are held to a higher standard, and this department cannot tolerate actions that undermine that standard." The room was silent for a moment, everyone absorbing the gravity of the situation. The chief did not need to threaten punishment. His presence and his words alone conveyed authority and clarity. Officers began to reflect on their actions, realizing how their casual behavior had damaged trust, not only within the department but also with the community they were sworn to protect. He then turned to the broader department, speaking not just to those involved, but to everyone present. "Each of you is accountable for your conduct, both on and off duty. Respect for colleagues and citizens alike is essential. Mistakes can happen, but it is how we respond that defines our character and our department." Conversations began quietly among the officers afterward. Some discussed the chief's leadership style, noting his calm approach and ability to command respect without intimidation. Others focused on the consequences of bias and the need for self-reflection. The prank that had seemed trivial the night before had now become a serious lesson, and it was clear that the department culture needed to change. The officers who had been involved were required to attend special sessions on bias, ethics, and professional conduct. The training was not punitive but designed to make them aware of their assumptions, how they affected behavior, and the broader impact of their actions on public trust. Each session reinforced the importance of empathy, judgment, and the responsibilities that came with wearing a uniform. Community members had also been actively discussing the event. Local leaders organized meetings with the police department to address the incident and talk about the steps being taken to prevent similar situations in the future. Residents shared their concerns openly, highlighting that the incident was more than just a moment of humiliation. It reflected systemic issues that required attention. The chief listened attentively, acknowledging their feelings and promising accountability, all while maintaining the calm composure that had become his trademark. Social media amplified the story, and the city watched closely. People expressed outrage over the officer's behavior, but also admiration for the chief's measured response. The incident sparked conversations about trust, respect, and leadership within law enforcement. Community forums began to feature discussions about bias, professional ethics, and the importance of holding public servants accountable. Within the department, the culture began to shift, slowly but noticeably. Officers who had previously relied on casual arrogance began to think more carefully about their actions and words. Conversations about respect and professionalism became more common. The chief's approach had shown that authority could be exercised without anger or punishment, and that leadership often meant guiding others through example rather than intimidation. The officers who had tied him to the pole carried the incident with them every day. They were reminded of it in their interactions with colleagues, in the way the community looked at them, and in the quiet moments when they reflected on their behavior. The embarrassment and reflection became catalysts for personal growth, shaping how they approached their duties and their relationships with the public. The chief continued his work with consistency and integrity, attending community meetings, engaging with residents, and addressing internal concerns with the same calm authority he had shown from the very beginning. His actions reinforced the lessons from the incident, demonstrating that accountability, patience, and leadership go hand in hand. The story spread beyond the city, reaching other departments and law enforcement communities. It became an example of how prejudice and reckless behavior can be confronted, not with aggression, but with dignity and composure. Officers from other areas began discussing the incident, reflecting on how similar situations might be handled differently in their own departments. For the community, the event became a turning point in their relationship with the police. While skepticism remained, many residents expressed cautious optimism, recognizing that leadership that emphasized respect and accountability could create real change. Forums, meetings, and discussions continued, fueled by the hope that incidents like this would lead to long-term improvements in trust and professionalism. The incident was also used as a teaching moment within the department. New recruits were introduced to the story as part of their orientation, learning early on about the consequences of bias, the importance of professional conduct, and the impact of calm, measured leadership. The story reinforced the idea that authority is not defined by force, but by integrity and the ability to guide others with respect. The officers who had acted recklessly found themselves under a new lens, constantly reminded of the lesson they had been taught. Each encounter with the community or colleagues served as a test of their growth and commitment to change. Their embarrassment became motivation to act responsibly and rebuild trust, not through words alone, but through consistent, respectful behavior. The chief's calm leadership had created a ripple effect, influencing not just the officers directly involved, but the entire department and the broader community. The night of the incident became a story that illustrated the importance of humility, patience, and the quiet power of authority, exercised with integrity. It was a story that would be retold, remembered and reflected upon for years, a reminder that true leadership is tested not in moments of comfort, but in the way one responds to mistakes and challenges. As weeks turned into months, the department slowly began to change. Policies were reviewed, training sessions became more focused on ethics and bias awareness, and the culture shifted towards accountability and professionalism. Officers who had once acted carelessly began to understand the weight of their roles and the trust placed in them by the community. The community continued to engage, attending forums, asking questions, and participating in discussions about police conduct. They were encouraged by the chief's approach, seeing that change was possible when leadership prioritized integrity and respect over arrogance or aggression. The incident, while initially a moment of humiliation, had transformed into a catalyst for reform and reflection, showing that even mistakes could be turned into powerful lessons for growth and improvement. The officers involved in the prank would never forget that night. Every time they walked the streets or interacted with the public, the memory of their actions and the calm authority of the man they had humiliated lingered. It became a guide, a constant reminder that leadership, respect, and professionalism are more important than ego or casual arrogance. Through it all, the chief's calm presence remained a stabilizing force. His leadership style, rooted in patience and measured authority, influenced every corner of the department. The incident had exposed flaws, but it had also revealed a path toward growth, accountability, and meaningful change. It was a story that would continue to be told, not as a tale of humiliation or anger, but as a lesson in the quiet power of integrity and the long-lasting impact of true leadership. After the incident and the chief's calm intervention, the community's reaction became the next focus. Word had spread quickly, first through local gossip and then through social media. People were talking about what had happened, expressing both shock at the officer's behavior and admiration for the chief's composed handling of the situation. The story resonated with many, sparking discussions not just about the prank but about the deeper issues of prejudice, respect, and accountability. Community leaders organized meetings to address the event. Residents, business owners, and local activists came together to share their perspectives and concerns. They spoke about the importance of trust between the police and the community, emphasizing that incidents like this, even when no physical harm occurred, could damage relationships that take years to build. Many residents expressed fear and frustration, pointing out that what had happened reflected a broader pattern of bias and unchecked behavior that sometimes goes unnoticed. The chief attended these meetings personally. His calm demeanor and willingness to listen made a strong impression on everyone present. He acknowledged the community's feelings without defensiveness and explained the steps being taken within the department to address the behavior of the officers involved. He stressed that the goal was not just to correct one incident, but to create lasting change and improve the relationship between the police and the public. During one meeting, a resident spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not just about what happened that night," she said. "It's about knowing that people we are supposed to trust could act without thinking, without respect. How can we feel safe?" The chief nodded, his expression serious. "I understand completely," he replied. "Trust must be earned and maintained. That is why accountability and training are key. We will ensure that our officers understand the responsibilities that come with their role." His words were simple, but they carried weight, and the community began to feel that the issue was being taken seriously. As the meetings continued, it became clear that the incident had sparked a larger conversation about bias and ethics within law enforcement. Residents shared personal stories and experiences, some of which mirrored the assumptions and prejudices revealed in the prank. The chief listened attentively, taking notes and asking questions, demonstrating that he valued their input and was committed to change. Social media continued to amplify the story. People shared videos and accounts of the incident, discussing the implications and lessons learned. Many praised the chief for his measured response, highlighting how he had turned a potentially humiliating situation into an example of dignity and leadership. Others focused on the need for ongoing reform, noting that one incident, while significant, pointed to larger issues that required attention and continuous effort. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing residents and police officials. The coverage emphasized the lessons learned from the incident, the dangers of bias, the importance of respect, and the impact of calm, thoughtful leadership. The narrative shifted from a focus on embarrassment to a broader discussion about accountability and integrity, showing how a single event could have far-reaching effects. Within the community, trust in the police department began to shift slowly. People who had once been skeptical started to observe the changes in behavior and culture that followed the incident. Officers began engaging more actively with residents, attending local events and participating in forums to listen and learn. The chief's approach served as a model for the department, demonstrating that leadership grounded in respect and integrity could foster positive change. Residents who had been critical began to see small but meaningful improvements. Officers approached situations with more awareness and care, avoiding assumptions and showing greater professionalism. Community meetings became more collaborative, with officers and residents working together to identify solutions and strengthen relationships. The incident, which could have been a source of division, became a catalyst for dialogue and reform. At the same time, the officers involved in the prank were undergoing training and reflection. They were encouraged to participate in community events, listen to residents' concerns, and engage in discussions about ethics and responsibility. The experience was humbling, but it helped them understand the impact of their actions and the importance of maintaining trust. Over time, their behavior began to change, influenced not by fear or punishment, but by understanding and respect for the people they served. Schools and youth organizations also became involved, using the story as an example to teach lessons about respect, bias, and leadership. Students discussed the event in classrooms, learning that power should be exercised responsibly and that prejudice can have serious consequences. The narrative provided a tangible example of accountability, helping young people understand the importance of ethics and empathy in everyday life. Community leaders and the chief worked together to create programs aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding. Workshops, forums, and public discussions encouraged residents to share their experiences and ideas for improving relationships with law enforcement. The focus was not only on addressing past mistakes but also on building a culture of mutual respect, understanding, and accountability. The officers who had initially acted carelessly began to develop a deeper sense of responsibility. They participated actively in community meetings, listened to feedback, and engaged in reflective discussions. Their experiences served as a reminder that leadership is not about power or authority alone, but about the impact of one's actions on others. The incident continued to be discussed in neighborhoods, workplaces, and social gatherings. People reflected on the lessons learned, emphasizing the importance of patience, calm authority, and ethical conduct. The story became symbolic, representing both the dangers of prejudice and the power of integrity. It reminded residents that while mistakes can happen, the response to those mistakes can define character and build trust. As months passed, the community and the department began to see measurable improvements. The relationship between residents and officers strengthened, and the culture within the department shifted towards accountability, professionalism, and respect. Programs established after the incident continued to thrive, encouraging ongoing dialogue and collaboration. The chief's approach remained central to this change. His calm leadership and commitment to integrity influenced the behavior of both officers and community members. By handling the incident with patience and dignity, he demonstrated that authority could be exercised responsibly and that respect and trust were earned through consistent action, not intimidation or fear. The story of the incident was retold frequently, not as a tale of humiliation, but as a lesson in leadership, integrity, and accountability. It served as a reminder that even in moments of error, there is an opportunity for growth and improvement. The community learned that they could play a role in shaping positive change, and the department learned the value of reflection, humility, and ethical conduct. Ultimately, the incident became more than a single event. It became a catalyst for lasting change. It showed that calm authority and integrity could transform situations, influence behavior, and strengthen relationships. The community, the department, and the individuals involved all experienced growth, learning that the lessons of one night could echo for years, shaping the way people interacted, led, and understood one another. Through it all, the chief continued his work with consistency and integrity. His presence reminded everyone that leadership is not about asserting dominance, but about guiding, teaching, and creating trust. The community, once skeptical and hurt, began to see hope and progress. And the officers, once careless and arrogant, began to understand the weight of their roles and the impact of their actions, slowly but steadily becoming better public servants. The story remained a vivid reminder that dignity, patience, and reflection could turn even the most challenging circumstances into powerful opportunities for growth and change. Months had passed since the night that had shaken the department and the community. The officers who had tied the new chief to a pole had transformed their approach to their work. The initial embarrassment and fear had given way to reflection, learning, and a deeper understanding of their responsibility. They now acted with thoughtfulness and awareness, understanding that every action and word carried weight. The chief's calm, steady leadership had created an environment where accountability and respect were no longer optional, but essential. The department itself had changed. Policies were reviewed, and training programs focused on ethics, bias awareness, and professionalism were fully integrated into the daily routine. New officers entering the department learned early about the incident and the lessons it taught. They were shown that leadership was about integrity, humility, and service, and that no uniform or title excused careless or prejudiced behavior. The story of that night became part of the department's culture, not as a source of shame, but as a guide for better conduct and decision-making. Community trust had begun to strengthen. Residents who had initially been skeptical and fearful started seeing the results of the chief's leadership and the changes in the department. Officers were more approachable, more attentive to the needs and concerns of the people they served. Meetings between the community and police became regular, fostering dialogue, understanding, and collaboration. People spoke openly about their experiences and offered suggestions for improvement, knowing that their voices were heard and respected. The incident had also become a reference point for education and awareness. Schools and youth programs discussed the story, using it as an example of the consequences of prejudice and the value of integrity and accountability. Students learned that leadership is demonstrated through character, patience, and empathy, and that actions have consequences, even when they seem minor. Teachers emphasized that real authority comes from respect earned through behavior, not fear or status. Even within the city at large, the story continued to be shared. Local media, social platforms, and community gatherings highlighted how the events had led to meaningful change. People admired the chief's ability to handle a tense and humiliating situation without resorting to anger or retribution. His calm authority, combined with a commitment to fairness and learning, had transformed what could have been a negative memory into a powerful story of growth and hope. The officers involved in the prank remained aware of their past mistakes. They carried the lesson with them, reminding themselves daily that respect and professionalism were the foundations of their work. Each encounter with the public or colleagues reinforced the importance of ethical behavior. Their previous arrogance was replaced with humility, and they began mentoring newer officers, passing on the wisdom gained from their own errors. The story of the night on the street became a lesson for all, teaching that growth often comes from reflection and the willingness to change. The chief continued to lead with patience and integrity. He attended community events, participated in forums, and personally engaged with officers to guide them in ethical decision-making. His approach was consistent, firm but calm, authoritative but approachable. Over time, his style became a model for other departments in nearby cities, showing that leadership rooted in dignity and respect could produce positive outcomes and lasting reform. Residents often reflected on the changes they had witnessed. Conversations about trust, respect, and accountability became more common in neighborhoods and workplaces. The incident, which had initially sparked anger and disbelief, now served as a reminder that even challenging situations could become opportunities for growth and transformation. Community members began to see the police not just as enforcers, but as partners working alongside them to maintain safety and fairness. The story also influenced broader discussions about bias and leadership. Local organizations held workshops and panels, inviting officers and community members to discuss how prejudice could be recognized and addressed. The incident served as a real-life case study, demonstrating that even a small act of disrespect or carelessness could have wide-reaching effects, but that the right response could turn a negative into a positive lesson for all involved. The officers who had once acted recklessly found that their relationships with colleagues and the public had strengthened through reflection and improved behavior. They were more conscious of their words, actions, and assumptions. They realized that leadership is not only about taking command, but about listening, understanding, and earning the trust of others. The night tied to the pole remained a vivid memory, serving as a reminder of the power of humility and accountability. Over time, incidents similar to that night became rare within the department. The culture shift initiated by the chief and reinforced by training and dialogue created a climate of respect and professionalism. Officers held each other accountable, fostering an environment where ethical behavior and thoughtful decision-making were expected and recognized. The city began to see the department not as a collection of individuals acting impulsively, but as a unified body guided by principles of fairness and integrity. The community's perception of law enforcement evolved. Residents who had once been cautious now expressed cautious optimism, seeing that leadership grounded in calm authority and integrity could create meaningful change. Public forums continued to reinforce collaboration and trust, and community members actively participated in shaping solutions and improvements. The incident that had caused fear and outrage became a cornerstone of positive dialogue, demonstrating that accountability and reflection can lead to transformation. The chief's leadership style left a lasting impression. By handling the situation without anger or retaliation, he had shown that power and authority could be exercised responsibly. His actions had taught officers, the community, and even the wider city that respect, patience, and integrity are more influential than force or intimidation. The story of the night on the street became a guiding example of how mistakes could be transformed into lessons for growth and improvement. Even years later, the story was shared in training programs, community workshops, and educational settings. It became a symbol of humility, reflection, and the importance of ethical conduct. Officers who had experienced the incident firsthand carried the lesson into their future interactions, mentoring younger colleagues and reinforcing a culture of accountability. The community remembered the chief's calm response and the transformative effect it had on the department, using it as a reminder of the impact that dignity, integrity, and reflection could have in even the most challenging situations. Ultimately, the incident became more than just a story of a prank gone wrong. It became a turning point that demonstrated the importance of ethical leadership, accountability, and the quiet power of respect. The officers who had acted carelessly learned valuable lessons that shaped their careers and interactions. The department as a whole moved toward a culture of integrity and professionalism. The community experienced renewed trust and collaboration with law enforcement, and the chief, through patience, composure, and unwavering principles, showed that leadership is not about authority alone, but about guiding, teaching, and inspiring growth in others. The city carried forward the lessons of that night as a reminder that even in moments of error, meaningful change is possible. Mistakes can be transformed into opportunities for reflection, learning, and lasting improvement. The story of the officers, the chief, and the community remained a testament to the power of patience, dignity, and accountability. It showed that leadership exercised with integrity can shape not only individuals but entire communities, leaving a legacy of growth, respect, and positive change that would last for generations to come.